My name is Clara Bennett, and I'm 26 years old. And the day my sister got dragged out of Grandpa's mansion crying while reporters filmed outside the gate, she looked straight at me and screamed, "You stole my life." Meanwhile, my parents stood frozen beside her holding foreclosure papers they still couldn't believe were real. Just 4 months earlier, those same people celebrated inside a lawyer's office after Grandpa left almost everything to my older sister, Sienna, the glamorous influencer everyone in the family adored. And me? I got a few keepsakes. And an old chessboard nobody wanted. My sister laughed when I carried it out of Grandpa's house. "You always choose useless things," she said. What she didn't know was that Grandpa had hidden something inside that chessboard powerful enough to destroy the entire inheritance she thought she won. And by the time my family realized the truth, it was already too late. So before I tell you exactly how everything fell apart, welcome to her revenge stories. If this story resonates with you, do me a quick favor, hit the thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and comment what time it is where you're watching from. I grew up in a family of 4, my father Vincent, my mother Elena, my older sister Sienna, and me. From the outside, we looked like one of those wealthy American families people secretly envy online. Big house in an expensive neighborhood outside Chicago. Luxury SUVs in the driveway. Summer trips to places my classmates could barely pronounce. But the truth was, most of it wasn't really ours. It all came from my grandfather, Everett Vale. Grandpa owned properties all across Illinois and parts of New York. Apartment buildings, office spaces, old commercial lots, even farmland nobody paid attention to anymore. He built everything himself after immigrating to America in his 20s with almost nothing. People respected him. Feared him a little too. By the time I was born, he was already wealthy enough that nobody in our family ever worried about bills. Well, except me sometimes. After Grandma died, Grandpa changed. He became quieter. Slower. He stopped attending business dinners and charity events. That's when my father slowly took over handling most of the company affairs. And honestly, I think that's when my parents started obsessing over inheritance. Nobody said it directly at first. But you could feel it hanging around the house all the time. Especially around Sienna. My sister was the type of person people noticed immediately. Loud laugh. Perfect hair. Expensive perfume. She walked into rooms like cameras were already recording her. And eventually, they actually were. By 19, she had built a huge social media following, posting luxury content online. Rooftop parties. Designer bags. Fancy restaurants. Yacht photos with captions pretending she worked harder than everyone else. My parents treated her like she was some kind of celebrity. I still remember one night during high school when Dad connected our TV to YouTube just so the whole family could watch one of Sienna's sponsored videos together. Mom literally clapped when the video ended. "That's my girl," she said proudly. "She knows how to make something of herself." I sat there quietly eating cold pasta while my coding homework stayed open on my laptop beside me. Nobody asked what I was working on. And come to think of it, they almost never did. I was different from Sienna in every possible way. I hated attention. Crowded places drained me. I liked structure, quiet, and learning things by myself. While Sienna spent nights at clubs downtown, I stayed in my room learning branding, coding, web design, and digital marketing online. There was something comforting about building things quietly behind a screen. I loved it. But in my family, quietness looked suspicious. Weak even. "You hide too much," my mother used to tell me constantly. Nobody successful sits alone in their room all day. One evening during dinner, Dad asked Sienna about some influencer event in Miami for almost 40 minutes straight. Which celebrities were attending? Which brands invited her? what dress she planned to wear. Then he looked at me. And what did you do today, Clara? I told him I had finished building a website template for a small online business owner who found me through a freelance forum. He nodded slowly. That's nice. Then immediately turned back to Sienna. The conversation was over. Little moments like that happened constantly. At Christmas, Sienna got designer handbags and expensive jewelry while Mom filmed her reaction for Instagram stories. I got socks once. Literally socks. And when I looked disappointed, Mom leaned close and whispered, "Don't be jealous of your sister just because she shines brighter." That sentence stayed with me for years. The favoritism became impossible to ignore the older we got. When I won a statewide digital innovation scholarship during college, my father barely looked up from his phone. But when Sienna hit 1 million followers online, my parents rented a private rooftop restaurant downtown and invited family friends to celebrate her success. There were photographers everywhere. Customized desserts. Even fireworks over the river. Meanwhile, I spent most of the night helping the event staff clean tables after guests left because Mom said, "At least make yourself useful." And the worst part? Nobody in the family acted like any of this was strange. Not even Sienna. She enjoyed it. You could see it in the little smirks she tried hiding whenever my parents compared us. "She's the ambitious one," Dad always said proudly. "Clara's too soft for business." Maybe that's why Grandpa started watching me differently over the years. Because while everyone else kept talking, he was the only one paying attention. The favoritism showed itself in everything. Not loudly at first. It lived in little moments people could easily pretend weren't a big deal. Which honestly made it hurt worse. My 16th birthday was the first time I realized I would probably never matter the way Sienna did. I came home from school that afternoon expecting something small at least. Nothing extravagant. Just remembered. But the house was quiet. Mom was upstairs arguing with some event planner on speakerphone while Dad was out with Sienna shopping for her upcoming birthday photo shoot. Nobody even said happy birthday until almost 7 that evening. Then Mom rushed through the front door carrying a tiny grocery store cake smashed slightly on one side like it had fallen during the drive home. "Oh my God, I completely lost track of time," she said distractedly while scrolling through her phone. "Happy birthday, sweetheart." She handed me a bookstore gift card without even looking up properly. And then, literally 30 seconds later, her phone rang. "Sienna, baby. Did the dress fit?" That was it. That was my birthday. I remember standing there holding that tiny cake while Mom walked into the kitchen talking excitedly about flower arrangements for Sienna's party 2 weeks later. And honestly, I think something inside me changed that night. Because 2 weeks later, my parents rented an entire rooftop venue downtown for Sienna's birthday. There was a live DJ. Professional photographers. Luxury gift tables. Customized cocktails with her name printed on napkins. Influencers everywhere taking selfies beside giant glowing signs that read, "Sienna's Golden Night." I wish I was exaggerating. Dad wore his best suit. Mom spent 3 hours getting ready. Meanwhile, I was told to help the catering staff because they were short-handed. At midnight, while everyone crowded around Sienna singing happy birthday under expensive rooftop lights, I stood near the bar collecting empty champagne glasses into plastic bins. My heels were killing my feet. My hands smelled like spilled alcohol and lemons. And nobody noticed I was gone from the party. Not even my own parents. The same thing happened at school too. During my senior year, I entered a statewide digital innovation competition after secretly spending months building a nonprofit website for local women's shelters. I stayed awake night after night coding pages by myself, teaching myself things from free online videos because I genuinely loved doing it. When I won first place and received a scholarship offer, I came home shaking from excitement. I really thought maybe this time would be different. Dad was sitting in the living room scrolling through stock reports on his tablet when I walked in holding the award envelope. "I won," I said breathlessly. "Out of the whole state." He glanced up briefly. "That's nice," he replied casually. "Did you thank your grandfather for helping with tuition?" Then he looked back down at his screen. That was the entire conversation. Months later, Sienna hit 100,000 followers online after some celebrity reposted one of her luxury vacation videos. My parents reacted like she had cured cancer. Mom booked a private dinner at one of the most expensive restaurants downtown. Family friends came. There were balloons. A custom cake. Champagne. Halfway through dinner, Mom stood up smiling proudly with tears in her eyes. To the daughter who's truly going places, she toasted while everyone clapped loudly. I remember forcing myself to smile while staring down at my untouched pasta getting cold. And then Sienna leaned toward me quietly and whispered with a tiny smirk. "Maybe if you smiled more, people would celebrate you too." I laughed softly like it didn't hurt. But later that night, I cried alone in my car for almost an hour before driving home. Not because of Sienna. Honestly. I expected it from her. What broke me was realizing my parents heard her say it. And none of them corrected her. By the time I started college, I had already stopped expecting emotional support from my parents. But a part of me still believed. Maybe if I asked for something practical, something connected to a real career, they would finally take me seriously. I was wrong. One evening during sophomore year, I came downstairs holding my laptop against my chest so tightly my fingers hurt. Dad was sitting at the kitchen island reviewing property reports while Mom scrolled through luxury kitchen ideas on her iPad. Sienna was upstairs filming some makeup collaboration video loud enough for the whole house to hear. I stood there awkwardly for almost 30 seconds before speaking. "There's this UX design certification program I want to take," I said carefully. "It's online, but it's really respected. If I finish it, I can start freelancing professionally." Dad didn't even look up immediately. "How much?" $400. That got his attention. He slowly lowered the papers in his hand and frowned at me like I'd asked for something ridiculous. $400 for internet classes. It's not just classes, I explained quickly. It teaches product design, user experience, branding systems. A waste of money, Mom interrupted sharply. You need to stop chasing unrealistic computer dreams. I felt my face burn instantly. It's actually a growing industry, I said quietly. People make real careers from it. Dad leaned back in his chair with this tired expression like I was exhausting him. "Clara, sweetheart, not everybody is meant to build companies online." Then he added something that honestly stayed with me for years. "You don't have your sister's personality. Business takes confidence." Upstairs, I could hear Sienna laughing loudly while recording content. And somehow that made the moment worse. I remember standing there holding my laptop, trying so hard not to cry over $400 in a house with imported marble countertops and 3 unused guest bedrooms. That night I went back upstairs and searched for free courses instead. 3 days later, Sienna casually walked into the kitchen announcing she had been invited to some luxury influencer networking event in Miami. "I might not go," she said dramatically while pouring herself sparkling water. "The hotel suites are kind of small." Dad laughed immediately. "How much do you need?" Sienna smiled without hesitation. "Probably first-class flights too." Mom actually looked excited. "Oh my God. This could be huge for your brand." And just like that, Dad pulled out his credit card. No questions. No lectures. No speeches about unrealistic dreams. I sat there silently eating leftover pasta while they discussed ocean view suites and designer outfits like it was the most normal thing in the world. Come to think of it, nobody even remembered the conversation about my course anymore. Christmas that year hurt even worse. The living room looked like something from a luxury catalog. Giant tree. Professional decorations. Expensive wrapped boxes stacked almost to the fireplace. Most of them were for Sienna. Mom filmed everything on her phone while Sienna opened designer handbags, luxury jewelry, expensive electronics, and sponsored beauty packages from brands. Dad kept smiling proudly, saying things like, "That's our superstar." Then eventually Mom handed me 2 small boxes. Inside one was a pair of socks. The other was a $25 coffee shop gift card. I honestly tried not to react. I really did. But I guess my face changed for half a second because Mom immediately looked irritated. "Don't be jealous of your sister," she said coldly. "She works hard for the attention she gets." That sentence hit harder than anything else that night. Because deep down, I realized something painful. My parents genuinely believed Sienna deserved more love than I did. Not because she was kinder. Not because she worked harder. But because she was louder. And in my family, loud people were the only ones who mattered. The only person who ever truly saw me was my grandfather. And honestly, I don't think I realized how much that mattered until much later. Everett Vale had become quieter with age. After Grandma died, something in him softened and disappeared at the same time. He stopped hosting giant business dinners. Stopped attending charity galas. Even his voice changed. Slower. More careful. But while everyone else mistook his silence for weakness, I started noticing something different. Grandpa saw everything. He noticed little things nobody else cared enough to see. Like how I always refilled his tea before the cup got empty because his hands shook slightly now. Or how I stayed behind after family dinners helping the kitchen staff stack plates while Sienna filmed luxury content around the estate pretending she practically owned the place already. One evening after dinner, I overheard Sienna outside near the fountain recording a video. "Someday this whole property will probably be mine," she laughed to her followers while spinning around dramatically in a silk dress. Meanwhile, Grandpa was inside alone trying to open a stubborn medicine bottle by himself. Something about that image bothered me deeply. So during college breaks, I started spending more time at his estate. Sometimes entire weeks. At first, my parents acted surprised. "You'd rather stay with an old man than spend vacation with people your age?" Mom asked once. But eventually they stopped questioning it. I think they assumed I was trying to get closer to Grandpa for inheritance reasons too. The difference was, I genuinely liked being there. His estate felt peaceful compared to our house. No shouting. No fake social media energy. No constant competition for attention. Just quiet halls, old books, jazz music, and the smell of coffee drifting through the kitchen every morning. Most evenings, Grandpa sat near the fireplace reading financial reports while soft jazz records played through the speakers Grandma used to love. And little by little, those evenings became my favorite part of life. Sometimes I cooked dinner myself because the kitchen staff usually left early. Grandpa loved simple food. Grilled salmon. Soup. Pasta with too much Parmesan cheese. We'd eat together quietly while rain tapped against the windows. No pressure to impress anyone. No comparisons. One rainy Sunday afternoon, I wandered into Grandpa's study looking for an old charger and found a dusty wooden chessboard buried inside the closet beneath several blankets. The pieces were heavy and worn from age. "You play?" I asked while carrying it toward him. Grandpa looked up slowly from his chair. For the first time all day, he smiled. "Used to." That night we played for almost 3 hours. And he completely destroyed me. I lost in less than 15 minutes the first round. Then 20 the second. By the third game, I was getting frustrated enough that Grandpa actually laughed quietly under his breath. "You think too fast," he told me while moving his bishop calmly across the board. "Slow down. Watch patterns." From then on, every Sunday evening became chess night. And honestly, those nights changed our relationship completely. Grandpa talked more during chess than anywhere else. Not dramatic speeches. Just small things. Stories about Grandma. Lessons from business deals that failed before his company became successful. Thoughts about people. Life. Pride. Patience. One sentence especially stayed with me. "The strongest player isn't the loudest one," he said one evening while carefully moving a knight across the board. "It's the one thinking 5 moves ahead." I didn't realize it then. But he wasn't only talking about chess. Sienna hated those evenings. One night she walked into the study wearing headphones around her neck while scrolling through comments on her phone. "How do you two sit here doing this for hours?" She groaned dramatically. "This is painfully boring." Grandpa just smiled quietly while resetting the board. Then Sienna looked around the study and laughed softly. "When Grandpa finally upgrades this house after renovations, this room better become a spa or something." I remember glancing at Grandpa after she said that. His smile faded slightly. Not angry. Just disappointed. But he didn't argue with her. That was the thing about Grandpa. The quieter he became, the more carefully he watched people reveal who they really were. As the years passed, my parents became more obvious about what they were trying to do. They wanted Grandpa emotionally attached to Sienna. Not me. Every visit to his estate started feeling strangely calculated, like some quiet performance nobody admitted was happening. Dad constantly pushed Sienna into conversations about business even when she barely understood what he was talking about. During dinners, he'd lean back proudly and say things like, "She's brilliant, Dad. Sharp. Organized." Mom would immediately jump in. "She understands branding naturally too. Honestly, she has your instincts." Meanwhile, Sienna sat there sipping wine like she already owned half the estate. Sometimes she nodded thoughtfully at things she clearly didn't understand just to sound impressive. And Grandpa? He barely reacted anymore. Just slow nods. Quiet little hmms. That silence frustrated my parents more than they admitted. One night after dinner, I found Grandpa sitting alone outside near the back garden wrapped in one of his old wool coats. The air smelled like rain and cut grass. The kitchen staff had already gone home. Inside the estate, I could still hear Sienna loudly recording Instagram stories near the staircase chandelier. I sat beside Grandpa quietly for a minute before speaking. "You barely talk anymore," I told him gently. He smiled faintly without looking at me. "When people reveal themselves loudly," he said softly, "there's less need for me to speak." At the time, I didn't fully understand what he meant. Now I do. The moment that changed everything happened 3 months later on Grandpa's 82nd birthday. And the worst part? Everybody forgot. I realized it accidentally while checking old dates inside my planner before class. No family group messages. No party arrangements. Nothing. Dad was busy handling property meetings downtown. Mom was at some charity event. And Sienna had flown to Arizona for a luxury influencer retreat sponsored by some skincare company. I stared at my phone for almost 10 minutes hoping somebody else would remember first. Nobody did. So after class, I drove straight to Grandpa's estate with grocery bags filling the back seat of my car. The house felt unusually empty when I arrived. Quiet enough that my footsteps echoed near the entrance hallway. Grandpa looked genuinely surprised when he saw me standing there holding balloons and grocery bags. "You remembered," he said softly. Something about the way he said it almost broke my heart. That entire day became one of my favorite memories with him. I cooked dinner myself while old jazz records played through the house. We spent hours flipping through dusty photo albums of him and Grandma from decades earlier. For the first time in years, I heard him laugh deeply. Like really laugh. Not the polite little smiles he usually gave people. At one point he stared at an old beach photo of Grandma and whispered, "She would have liked you." I still think about that sentence sometimes. That evening, just as we finished eating, the front doors suddenly opened loudly. Sienna walked inside wearing oversized sunglasses despite it being nighttime, carrying luxury shopping bags in both hands. "Oh good, you're awake," she said casually while dropping the bags onto a chair. Then before she even sat down, she looked directly at Grandpa and asked, "So, have you finalized the inheritance paperwork yet?" The entire room went silent. Even the jazz music suddenly felt too loud. I slowly lowered my fork onto the plate. Grandpa stared at her for several long seconds without speaking. And for the first time in my life, I saw something cold pass quietly through his eyes. About 4 months after Grandpa's birthday, everything changed overnight. I was sitting in my apartment finishing a client website revision around 2 in the morning when my phone suddenly started vibrating nonstop across the desk. "Dad. Mom. Sienna." Over and over. The second I answered, all I heard was screaming and confusion in the background. "Your grandfather collapsed," Dad said breathlessly. "They're taking him to St. Vincent's." I don't even remember grabbing my keys. I just remember driving through red lights with my hands shaking so badly I almost missed the hospital entrance entirely. When I arrived, Grandpa was already unconscious in intensive care surrounded by machines and nurses speaking in low, urgent voices. The smell of antiseptic filled the hallway. And for the first time in my life, Everett Vale looked small. Weak. It terrified me. Dad stayed less than an hour before saying he had meetings related to property contracts. Mom cried dramatically for a while near the waiting room before leaving too. The next morning, a giant flower arrangement arrived with a card signed, "Thinking of you, the Vale family." That was basically my father's contribution. Sienna somehow turned the entire situation into online content almost immediately. The same evening Grandpa was hospitalized, she posted a black and white selfie beside his hospital room with the caption, "Family is everything. Please pray for my grandfather." The comments flooded with sympathy. Thousands of them. Meanwhile, I was inside the room helping nurses clean spilled water off Grandpa's blanket because his hands trembled too badly to hold the cup steadily. And honestly, that became my life for the next several weeks. I took leave from school without even thinking about it. I slept in uncomfortable hospital chairs with stiff blankets that smelled like bleach. Some nights I barely slept at all because the machines kept beeping every few minutes. I learned his medication schedules. Helped nurses feed him soup when his strength got worse. Read books aloud when he couldn't sleep. Sometimes old jazz music played softly from my phone because it calmed him down. One night around 3 in the morning, I sat beside his bed reading chapters from an old crime novel while rain hammered against the hospital windows outside. Grandpa suddenly smiled weakly and whispered, "Your grandmother used to read to me exactly like that." I nearly cried right there. Sienna visited occasionally. But every single conversation somehow circled back to money. Every time. "Did you update the wills yet? Who's handling the downtown buildings now? Did Dad finalize the paperwork before you got sick?" At one point, she literally pulled out property documents inside the hospital room while Grandpa struggled to breathe properly. I remember feeling physically sick watching it. One evening after Sienna finally left, Grandpa slowly reached toward me with trembling fingers. I grabbed his hand immediately. His skin felt cold. Fragile. For a long moment he just looked at me quietly like he was trying to memorize my face. Then he whispered softly. Invisible children usually become the strongest adults. I couldn't even answer. I just lowered my head and cried silently beside his bed while machines beeped around us. 3 weeks later, Everett Vale died peacefully in his sleep just before sunrise. The hospital called me first. Not my father. Me. At the funeral, I barely held myself together. Seeing Grandpa's empty chair near the cemetery soil completely destroyed me. Meanwhile, Sienna arrived wearing oversized sunglasses and a designer black dress while cameras from local business magazines quietly photographed the family. People hugged her like she was the grieving center of everything. And maybe the worst part. She acted like she believed it too. Later that night after the funeral, I returned to my parents' house to grab a few things I left there earlier. That's when I heard voices coming from Dad's office. Laughter. Real laughter. I stopped outside the partially open door without meaning to listen. At least the properties can finally transition properly now, Dad said with relief in his voice. Mom laughed softly. And thank God he updated most of the documents before getting sick. Then Sienna said something that made my stomach twist. I just hope Clara doesn't expect equal shares after playing nurse for a few weeks. All three of them laughed quietly. I stood there frozen in the dark hallway holding my car keys so tightly they dug into my palm. And honestly, that was the exact moment something inside me finally broke. The will reading happened 5 days after Grandpa's funeral. And honestly, I think a small part of me still believed he would make things fair in the end. Not because I wanted millions of dollars. I just wanted proof that the years I spent loving him actually mattered. The lawyer's office sat on the 23rd floor of a downtown building overlooking the river. Rain tapped softly against the windows while everyone settled into leather chairs around the conference table. Dad looked unusually confident that morning. Mom wore cream-colored designer clothes like she was attending some luxury brunch instead of a will reading. And Sienna? She walked in wearing sunglasses indoors carrying a white handbag that probably cost more than my car. The second she sat down, she crossed her legs slowly and smiled at me. Not kindly. More like someone already celebrating before the game even started. The family attorney, Mr. Holden, adjusted his glasses and opened the documents carefully. His voice stayed calm and professional the entire time. To Vincent Vale, he began, management rights to all previously assigned commercial operations shall remain under your supervision. Dad nodded immediately. Then came the rest. The mansion. Luxury vehicles. Investment portfolios. Vacation properties. High-value visible assets. All transferred directly to Sienna Vale. I felt my stomach drop harder with every sentence. Mom actually reached over squeezing Sienna's hand proudly while tears filled her eyes. I told you, she whispered emotionally. Your grandfather saw your potential. And me? I received a small educational trust fund. And several personal keepsakes. That was it. No properties. No investments. Nothing meaningful. For a few seconds, the room felt blurry around me. I couldn't even fully process what was happening. After everything. The hospital nights. The birthdays. The years of caring about him when nobody else truly did. This was how it ended. I remember standing slowly from my chair while Sienna tried hiding the tiny satisfied smile pulling at her lips. Then Dad looked directly at me and said something that honestly hurt more than the will itself. Don't take this personally, Clara. Your grandfather simply trusted Sienna more with responsibility. Responsibility. The girl who treated Grandpa's estate like a content studio. I left before anybody could see me cry. And things somehow got worse after that. Sienna transformed almost immediately after inheriting the mansion. Within 2 weeks, she started hosting luxury parties there while some of Grandpa's belongings were still sitting untouched upstairs. Influencers filled the hallways taking selfies beside Grandma's antique staircase. Loud music blasted through rooms where Grandpa once sat quietly listening to jazz records. One night, I saw a video online of strangers dancing drunk beside Grandpa's garden fountain while Sienna laughed holding champagne. I had to close my phone because it made me physically sick. Then came the final blow. Sienna announced she was selling the estate. The property is too old-fashioned, she told followers online. I'm thinking modern glass architecture instead. That sentence made something snap inside me. So the day movers arrived to empty the mansion, I drove there one last time hoping to save at least a few memories before strangers erased everything. The house barely felt recognizable anymore. Furniture covered in plastic. Workers carrying boxes everywhere. The smell of dust and cardboard filling the halls. I quietly walked through Grandpa's study trying not to cry. I took old photographs first. Then his jazz records. An old coffee mug with a chipped handle. And finally, the chessboard. It sat alone near the bookshelf like nobody had touched it since our last game together. Sienna laughed when she saw me carrying it. "Oh my God," she said. "You still want that old thing?" I ignored her completely. That chessboard wasn't wood and pieces to me. It was Grandpa. That night, alone in my apartment surrounded by boxes of old memories, I placed the chessboard on my table and slowly began setting up the pieces exactly the way Grandpa taught me years earlier. Pawn. Knight. Bishop. My hands stopped suddenly. One black knight felt heavier than the others. At first I thought I imagined it. But when I turned it over, I noticed tiny scratches near the base. My heartbeat started rising immediately. Carefully, I twisted the bottom open. Inside was a tiny silver key. And a folded handwritten note. My hands trembled opening it. "If you found this, then I was right. You were always the one who valued memories over possessions. Take this key to Holden v. Price Law Offices. Do not tell anyone. And thank you for loving an old man when nobody else had time." I started crying before I even finished reading. The next morning, I drove straight to the law office barely able to breathe properly. The second Mr. Holden saw the key, his expression changed completely. For the first time since Grandpa died. Somebody looked surprised. "He said you would find it," he whispered quietly. Minutes later, he unlocked a hidden private deposit box Grandpa secretly prepared years earlier. Inside were company ownership papers. Hidden investments. Trust funds. Land deeds. Patents. Financial accounts worth more than every visible asset Sienna inherited combined. And resting on top of everything was Grandpa's final letter. I opened it slowly with shaking hands. "Chess reveals character," it began. "Your sister only cared about winning. You cared about understanding the game." The truth unraveled faster than any of us expected. At first, Sienna acted untouchable. She flooded social media with videos inside the mansion calling it the beginning of her luxury real estate era. She hosted expensive dinner parties, hired designers, and talked non-stop about turning Grandpa's properties into a modern lifestyle brand. But then the letters started arriving. Tax notices. Legal warnings. Debt claims. At first she ignored them. Then the lawsuits came. Turns out Grandpa had attached enormous liabilities to almost every visible asset she inherited. Massive property taxes. Failing business loans. Delayed lawsuits tied to old commercial developments. Maintenance debts nobody knew existed. And because Sienna barely understood business beyond social media sponsorships. She signed papers without reading most of them carefully. Dad tried stepping in at first. I heard through relatives that he spent weeks scrambling between lawyers and accountants trying to stop the damage. But the deeper they looked into the finances, the worse everything became. One by one, the empire Sienna thought she inherited started collapsing publicly. The mansion was the first thing to go. I still remember driving past the estate one afternoon and seeing foreclosure notices attached near the front gate while movers carried furniture outside. Reporters had already started circling because local business blogs picked up the story. Online, people who once worshipped Sienna suddenly turned cruel. Comments flooded her pages calling her fake, spoiled, irresponsible. Brands quietly stopped working with her. Invitations disappeared. Even her influencer friends slowly vanished once the luxury lifestyle stopped being profitable. And honestly, watching it happen felt strange. Part of me was angry. But another part of me just felt tired. For the first time in her life, Sienna failed publicly. And she had absolutely no idea who she was without attention. Meanwhile, I stayed quiet. I used the hidden assets Grandpa left me to slowly rebuild the parts of the company he actually cared about. The skills my parents once mocked me for learning online suddenly became the reason the business survived. I redesigned outdated company systems. Fixed digital operations. Rebuilt investment structures. Hired smarter management teams. And slowly, things stabilized. Not flashy. Not glamorous. Just real. That's what Grandpa always valued anyway. About 3 months after the will reading, I was sitting in my small home office reviewing contracts late one evening when somebody knocked hard against the front door. At first I thought it was a delivery driver. Then I opened the door and froze. My parents stood outside looking exhausted. And behind them was Sienna. For a second, I barely recognized her. No designer glow. No cameras. No dramatic confidence. She looked pale. Thin. Completely drained. Rain soaked through their clothes while police lights flashed faintly down the street behind them where repossession officers had apparently just finished removing the last vehicles from the mansion. Mom clutched folded paperwork against her chest with trembling hands. Dad couldn't even look directly at me. Then Sienna finally spoke. Her voice cracked halfway through the sentence. Why would Grandpa do this to me? And suddenly all those years flashed through my mind at once. The birthdays. The hospital nights. The laughter after Grandpa's funeral. The will reading. The smug smiles. Everything. I stared at her quietly for a few seconds before answering. Grandpa didn't punish you for being loved, I said softly. Rain poured harder around us. He punished you for believing love meant entitlement. Nobody spoke after that. Not my father. Not my mother. Not even Sienna. Because deep down, all of them finally understood the truth. Grandpa had seen everything long before any of us realized he was playing a completely different game. That night after my parents left, I sat alone in complete silence for a long time. Rain tapped softly against the windows while the house smelled faintly like coffee and old paper. Everything felt strange. Not victorious. Not satisfying the way people imagine revenge feels. Just heavy. Because no matter what happened, they were still my family. And honestly, seeing Sienna completely broken shook me more than I expected. A few days later, I finally opened Grandpa's last hidden letter completely. There was one final paragraph folded at the bottom I hadn't noticed earlier because my hands were shaking too badly the first time I read it. It said, "If your sister ever learns humility, help her once. But only once. Not because she earned it. Because bitterness destroys good people faster than greed destroys foolish ones. I stared at those words for a long time. And somehow, it sounded exactly like him. So despite everything, I helped them. Not the way they expected though. I helped my parents move into a smaller apartment after the mansion was officially repossessed. It was nothing luxurious. Just a quiet 2-bedroom place outside the city with old cabinets and a tiny balcony overlooking a grocery store parking lot. Mom cried the first night while unpacking dishes. Dad barely spoke at all anymore. As for Sienna, she changed the most. The internet moved on from her surprisingly fast. One minute she was trending, the next minute nobody cared. Brands stopped calling. Followers dropped. Friends disappeared. And for the first time in her life, nobody was clapping every time she entered a room. A month later, she showed up quietly at my office asking if I still meant what I said about helping her work. No designer clothes. No cameras. No attitude. Just exhaustion. I gave her a modest position handling social media management for one of Grandpa's smaller companies. Nothing glamorous. Real work. Deadlines. Structure. Accountability. At first, she hated it. I could see frustration all over her face whenever employees treated her like a normal person instead of a celebrity. But slowly, something started changing. Not perfectly, but enough. And through all of it, I never handed over Grandpa's hidden fortune. Because Grandpa hadn't built his inheritance to reward greed. He built it to protect character. Late one evening after everyone left the office, I returned home exhausted and sat beside Grandpa's old chessboard again. The same board that started everything. I slowly moved the black king piece across the board while tears burned quietly behind my eyes. And just like that, I heard Grandpa's voice in my memory again. The king is the weakest piece on the board. The real power belongs to the player who stays calm after everyone else loses control. I smiled softly through tears because for the first time in my entire life, I finally understood what he meant. I was never invisible. I was simply surrounded by people too distracted to see me. And honestly, maybe some of you watching this understand that feeling too. Have you ever been the overlooked child in your family? Have you ever watched someone louder get rewarded while your sacrifices went unnoticed? And if you were in my position, would you have helped them in the end? Tell me honestly down in the comments. I really want to know. And if this story touched you in any way, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear this message today. Also check out the other stories here on her revenge stories. Because trust me, some family secrets run even deeper than this one.